We signed contracts that were supposed to be protected by the courts, right? Like they were supposed to set trust fund money aside, right? Do you think we received any trust fund money? You know, at the end of the day, nada.
Yeah, it was, it had reached that point where, you know, I think Bob himself would probably have to explain that, but he was in a place where it was no secret. Everybody knew Bob was using.
Yeah, he had drug
problems. He was not in a very good space and place.
At 57, Ralph Tresvant finally broke his silence about the dark truth that nearly destroyed New Edition from within.
Nada, right? So this is the court system. This is a system that's not set up, you know, and designed, but, you know, ultimately, like we will get the last laugh.
The predatory contracts, violent confrontations, and betrayals that the group had hidden for decades were about to be exposed.
Body's like digging up old wounds, so it feels a little uncomfortable sometimes just watching it, just reliving that whole situation.
What Tresvant revealed would change how fans saw their beloved R&B legends forever. So let's get into it. Ralph Tresvant remembered the exact moment he realized they had been played. The tour bus pulled up to the Orchard Park housing projects in Boston, the same place where 5 young boys had dreamed of stardom just months earlier. Now they were returning as chart-topping recording artists, fresh off their first major concert tour promoting Candy Girl. Maurice Starr, their producer and manager, handed each member of New Edition an envelope. Inside was a check made out for exactly $1.87. The boys stared at the pieces of paper in disbelief. They had just completed a nationwide tour, selling out venues across the country, with their single sitting at #1 on the R&B charts.
Just knowing that we're in such a cutthroat industry, right? Like, it's about the numbers. Like, when we as a group first signed on, right? We signed contracts that were supposed to be protected by the courts.
The contracts their mothers had signed were designed to be predatory from the beginning. Starr had structured deals that made the young performers responsible for every expense imaginable, while giving them virtually no share of the profits. Tour buses, hotel rooms, meals, promotional costs, studio time, and even the clothes they wore on stage were all deducted from their earnings. Bobby Brown was the first to speak up, his voice cracking with anger and confusion. He wanted to know how they could sell millions of records and fill arenas, but walk away with less than $2 each. The other members stood in stunned silence, still processing the reality of their situation.
Do you think we received any trust fund money? You know, at the end of the day, nada, right? So this is the court system. This is a system that's not set up, you know, and designed.
The trust fund money that was supposed to be protected by the courts had vanished. Starr claimed that all proceeds had been used to cover production costs and touring expenses. Their mothers, who had trusted the smooth-talking producer with their children's futures, were devastated when they learned the truth. Tresvant watched as his friends' families struggled financially while their music generated millions in revenue. The irony was crushing. They were living in poverty while their voices played on radios around the world. The $1.87 checks became a symbol of everything wrong with the music industry's treatment of young black artists.
It's called recoupable expenses. The record labels charge the artists for all the money that they spend on them. They have to pay it back because it is a loan up until when they're making some profits.
The exploitation was systematic and calculated. Starr had created a business model that allowed him to profit enormously while keeping the actual performers in financial bondage. The boys were too young to understand the legal complexities, and their families lacked the resources to challenge such predatory contracts in court. The Bobby Brown who returned from solo success was not the same person who had left New Edition. Ralph Tresvant watched his childhood friend spiral into a world of drugs, violence, and unpredictable behavior that would tear their brotherhood apart from the inside. Brown's drug use had become an open secret within the group by the mid-1980s. What started as experimentation quickly escalated into dependency that affected every aspect of his performance and personality. Tresvant witnessed Brown showing up to rehearsals high, missing important television appearances, and becoming increasingly erratic during live performances. The transformation was particularly painful for Tresvant because he remembered the Bobby from their childhood in Roxbury. That Bobby had been ambitious, talented, and fiercely loyal to his friends. The new Bobby was paranoid, aggressive, and seemed to view his former bandmates as obstacles to his individual success. During the 1996 Home Again reunion tour, Brown's behavior reached dangerous new levels. He would extend his solo segments far beyond what had been rehearsed, leaving his bandmates standing awkwardly on stage while he performed what essentially became Bobby Brown concerts within New Edition shows.
Looking like a natural queen. I said, let me take you for a ride.
The drug use was affecting Brown's judgment and impulse control. He would make inappropriate comments to audiences, engage in explicit dance moves that made the other members uncomfortable, and sometimes appeared barely coherent during interviews. Tresvant found himself constantly making excuses for his friend's behavior to reporters and industry executives.
Everybody knew Bob was using.
Yeah, he had drug
problems. He was not in a very good space and place, and obviously, you could see it. You could see it every night. I mean, watching him, and you just go, wow. You go, come on, man. You got to pull it together, man. Like,
the situation reached a breaking point during one particular show when Brown's antics went too far. Ronnie DeVoe attempted to pull him off stage when his solo segment ran excessively long, leading to a physical altercation that shocked everyone present. What should have been a celebration of their reunion became a public display of internal dysfunction. Brown's entourage had grown increasingly problematic as well. He traveled with a crew of hangers-on who enabled his worst behaviors while creating additional tension within the group's dynamic. These individuals had no investment in New Edition's success and seemed more interested in maintaining Brown's dependency on substances and poor decision-making. The violence that followed Brown became a pattern that extended beyond just verbal confrontations. Members of his crew had been involved in serious incidents, including the death of his friend Anthony B., who was killed by someone connected to New Edition's production team during a dispute over stage time and scheduling. The reunion tour was supposed to be New Edition's triumphant return to the stage as a complete group, but it became a nightmare of violence and chaos that left permanent scars on everyone involved. Ralph Tresvant had never imagined that performing with his childhood friends could become genuinely dangerous. The tension had been building throughout the tour as Bobby Brown's behavior became increasingly unpredictable. His drug use was affecting not just his performances, but his relationships with everyone around him, including the crews and security teams that traveled with the group. On the night everything exploded, Brown had once again extended his stage time far beyond what had been agreed upon during rehearsals. The other members were growing frustrated as their own performance time was being cut short, and the audience was becoming restless with the show's disorganized flow.
So Bobby Brown dropped the mic and a fist fight ensued. So you were right there when it happened.
I was there when it happened.
Explain.
Ronnie DeVoe made the decision to physically intervene, attempting to pull Brown away from the microphone to restore order to the performance. What started as an attempt to salvage the show quickly escalated into a full physical confrontation between two men who had grown up together like brothers. The fight was brutal and personal, with both men throwing punches while thousands of fans watched in shocked silence. Security rushed the stage to separate them, but the damage was already done. The brotherhood that New Edition represented to their fans was being destroyed in real time. broadcast to an arena full of witnesses.
Gunshots went off, right?
Yeah, gunshots.
No one
And-
got hit, right?
Nobody got hit, but all I heard, gun, and all you had to tell me was gun. My ass was gone.
The situation escalated beyond anything anyone could have anticipated when gunshots suddenly rang out in the venue. Nobody was hit, but the sound of firearms being discharged during what was supposed to be a celebration of R&B music created panic throughout the arena. Tresvant ran for cover, not knowing who was shooting or why. The gunshots were traced to members of the various entourages that traveled with different members of the group. These hangers-on had brought their own conflicts and beefs into what should have been a family reunion, turning the backstage area into a dangerous environment where violence was always just beneath the surface.
But you know, when you start getting all these people and gathering all these unfamiliar faces, and you got people trying to prove I'm Team Johnny, I'm Team Bobby, I'm Team Ronnie.
The incident forced Tresvant and his bandmates to confront the reality that their reunion tour had become something dangerous and uncontrollable. The innocent joy of making music together had been poisoned by drugs, violence, and the toxic influence of people who had no investment in New Edition's legacy or well-being. When Johnny Gill joined New Edition in 1987, it was supposed to be a temporary solution to Bobby Brown's departure. But what actually happened behind the scenes was far more complicated and controversial than fans ever knew, involving secret negotiations, hurt feelings, and decisions made without key members' knowledge. Ralph Tresvant discovered Johnny Gill's addition to the group in the most shocking way possible, by showing up to record the Heartbreak album in Minneapolis and finding Gill already established as a New Edition member. Nobody had consulted Tresvant about this major change to his group's lineup, and the betrayal cut deep. The decision had been made during a period when rumors were circulating that Tresvant might be leaving New Edition to pursue solo opportunities. Rather than addressing these rumors directly with their lead singer, the other members and management took it upon themselves to secure Gill as a replacement, treating Tresvant as if he had already departed.
I was going to say, when you was talking about me replacing Bobby, that people don't realize, even when I joined the group, when I got in the group, Bobby told me, we had talked, and he was saying, man, I remember when you first joined the group, I freaking hated it. I was so jealous.
Gill himself was uncomfortable with the situation, knowing that he was essentially being brought in to replace the group's most recognizable voice without that person's knowledge or consent. The awkwardness of the situation was evident to producers Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, who had to navigate recording sessions where the group's internal dynamics were clearly fractured. The geographical and cultural differences also created tension. Gill was from Washington, D.C., while the other members shared the bond of growing up together in Boston's Orchard Park projects. Despite his undeniable vocal talent, he was always going to be seen as an outsider who had been inserted into a family unit.
And it was like, man, he said, when you opened, your mouth, I saw you singing, and I was just like, I was like, damn.
The tension between Gill and Brown was particularly complex because Brown had initially been jealous of Gill's vocal abilities and the positive reception he received from New Edition fans. Despite this initial jealousy, the two had developed a friendship that extended beyond their professional relationship, with Gill often visiting Brown's home and supporting his solo career. However, Gill's presence in the group created an uncomfortable dynamic where he was simultaneously an insider and an outsider. He had the vocal chops to hang with New Edition's harmonies, but he hadn't shared the childhood experiences that bonded the original members together through poverty, exploitation, and early success. The success of the Heartbreak album complicated the narrative around Gill's addition to the group. His vocals were undeniably a major factor in the album's commercial and critical success, making it difficult for anyone to argue that his inclusion had been a mistake. Yet the way he had been brought into the group left lasting resentment that would affect New Edition's internal dynamics for years to come. While his bandmates were achieving massive solo success, Ralph Tresvant found himself struggling with feelings of resentment and abandonment that he had never publicly acknowledged. As the supposed lead singer of New Edition, he felt entitled to the same level of support and promotion that Bobby Brown and Belle Biv DeVoe were receiving. The timeline of everyone's solo departures was particularly painful for Tresvant. Bobby Brown's Don't Be Cruel album had achieved massive commercial success, selling over 7 million copies and establishing him as a solo superstar.
Don't be cruel, 'cause I would never be that cruel to you.
Meanwhile, Belle Biv DeVoe's Poison album had also achieved multi-platinum status, proving that the New Edition brand could succeed in multiple configurations. Tresvant's own solo album, while commercially successful with hits like Sensitivity, never reached the same heights as his former bandmates' projects. This disparity was especially frustrating because he had been positioned as New Edition's frontman and primary vocalist throughout most of their career together.
Eventually, when everybody started working on their own projects, I'm just sitting still. And this could get ugly. This could turn into, well, when do I work again?
The fear of being left behind professionally pushed Tresvant into solo work that he didn't necessarily want to pursue. He felt forced into competing with his own friends because the alternative was career stagnation, while everyone around him achieved individual success and recognition. The internal politics of who got to use the New Edition name for touring and promotional purposes became another source of tension. Different members had different ideas about ownership and control of the group's legacy, leading to legal disputes that played out both in courtrooms and in public statements.
Attorney maybe passed the information to Johnny. Johnny at some point locked it down, passed the information to Ralph, put Ralph on it, and it sat for a minute.
The trademark situation revealed the depths of mistrust that had developed within the group. Johnny Gill, the newest member, had somehow ended up controlling the New Edition name without the knowledge of some of the original founders. This created a power dynamic that went against the supposed brotherhood and equality that the group claimed to represent. Tresvant's resentment was compounded by his perception that he had been the most loyal member throughout all of New Edition's various incarnations and business disputes. While others pursued individual opportunities, he had remained committed to the group concept, only to find himself excluded from major decisions about the group's future.
And that was a struggle for a hot second. Might not have been, any malice, but at the end of the day, you would hope that your brother would just say, yo.
The resolution of the trademark dispute eventually returned control to all the original members, but the damage to relationships had already been done. The fact that such fundamental decisions about the group's identity could be made without involving everyone exposed the lack of communication and trust that had developed over the years. The music industry's exploitation of New Edition went far beyond Maurice Starr's initial theft of their earnings. Ralph Tresvant watched as a systematic pattern of financial abuse followed the group throughout their career, designed to keep successful black artists in a state of dependency and debt despite their commercial success. Even after achieving multi-platinum success with albums like Heartbreak and Home Again, the members found themselves struggling financially due to the structure of their recording contracts. The major labels had learned from smaller predators like Starr, creating more sophisticated methods of extracting value from artists while providing them with minimal compensation. The concept of recoupable expenses meant that New Edition was responsible for paying back virtually every cost associated with their career: recording studio time, promotional campaigns, music videos, touring expenses, and even the salaries of record company executives who worked on their projects. These costs were inflated and often involved services that benefited the label more than the artists.
When you're young, you're not thinking about these things. You really don't have too many people to guide you, because you're really not of age to really understand business anyways. But when you throw publishing in, publishing is a real kind of, you really got to know.
The publishing rights situation was particularly devastating. Most of New Edition's biggest hits were written and produced by outside writers and producers, meaning the group received no long-term royalties from songs that defined their career and continued to generate revenue decades later. They were essentially hired performers on their own records. Touring, which should have been their most profitable revenue stream, was structured through deals that left them paying for their own transportation, accommodation, and production costs, while promoters and booking agents took the largest percentages of gross revenues. The group would sell out arenas and still struggle to cover their basic expenses. The psychological impact of this financial abuse was devastating for young men who had grown up in poverty and thought their musical success would provide security for themselves and their families. Instead, they found themselves in a more sophisticated form of the same economic exploitation their families had faced in the housing projects. The pattern extended beyond just New Edition to virtually every successful R&B and hip-hop act of their generation. The industry had developed a business model that allowed white-owned corporations to profit enormously from black artistic talent while keeping the creators themselves in financial bondage through complex legal structures. The members' attempts to gain financial independence through solo careers and side projects were often sabotaged by contractual obligations that gave their original labels rights to their individual work as well. They were trapped in a system designed to extract their creative output while providing minimal compensation in return.
When you're young, you're not thinking about these things. You really don't have too many people to guide you because you're really not of age to really understand business anyways. But when you throw publishing in, publishing is a real kind of, you really got to know.
The advice that came too late for New Edition became their mission to share with younger artists. The importance of retaining publishing rights, understanding contract terms, and maintaining control over their creative output was knowledge that could have changed their entire financial trajectory if they had possessed it during their early career negotiations. The formation of RBRM, Ronnie, Bobby, Ricky, Mike, represented the most public humiliation Ralph Tresvant had ever experienced. Bobby Brown's decision to crop him out of a group photo and announce a new configuration of New Edition without him was a betrayal that cut deeper than any business dispute or creative difference. The split occurred after accusations that Tresvant and Johnny Gill had attempted to trademark the New Edition name without consulting the other members. While the trademark situation was eventually resolved, the damage to relationships was permanent and played out in the most public ways possible. Brown's social media post featuring the cropped photo was a deliberate and calculated insult. Rather than addressing their differences privately or through proper legal channels, he chose to humiliate Tresvant publicly by literally erasing him from New Edition's visual history while celebrating the remaining members. The RBRM concept was presented as a return to New Edition's roots, but it was actually a rejection of everything the group had claimed to represent about brotherhood and loyalty. By excluding two members who had been integral to the group's most successful periods, the remaining members were prioritizing personal grudges over their collective legacy.
The only thing about Cool It Now is you branded the names Ronnie, Bobby, Ricky, Mike. Then later on, they made a group with those initials.
That was terrible. I couldn't stand that group. They used to have about Ronnie, Bobby. It was called RBDG, BB. I don't know.
The public nature of the split forced fans to choose sides in what should have been an internal dispute. New Edition's fan base was divided between those who supported the RBRM configuration and those who felt that any version of the group without all original and longtime members was illegitimate.
Talking about it's like digging up old wounds, so it feels a little uncomfortable sometimes just watching it, just reliving that whole situation. And
The emotional toll of being publicly rejected by his lifelong friends was devastating for Tresvant. He had invested decades of his life in maintaining New Edition as a group concept, often at the expense of his own solo career opportunities, only to be dismissed and humiliated when internal politics shifted against him. The RBRM period exposed the fundamental instability that had always existed within New Edition's relationships. Despite their public image as a brotherhood, the group was actually held together by business arrangements and mutual financial interests, rather than genuine friendship and loyalty. The split also revealed how little respect some members had for the fans who had supported them throughout their career. By presenting RBRM as a legitimate continuation of New Edition while excluding founding members, they were essentially telling fans that their emotional investment in the complete group didn't matter. The regret that some members later expressed about the RBRM split suggested they recognized the damage it had caused to their collective legacy and individual reputations. However, the public nature of the humiliation made it impossible to simply take back or undo the harm that had been done. Ralph Tresvant's 2024 reunion with Bobby Brown on stage marked the latest chapter in a decades-long cycle of reconciliation and betrayal that had defined New Edition's internal relationships. At 57, Tresvant finally understood that this pattern was likely to continue until the day they died. The onstage moment where Tresvant joined Brown for Every Little Step was both healing and painful.
Every little step I take, you will be there. Every little step I make.
It reminded both men of their shared history and musical chemistry, while highlighting how much damage had been done to their friendship over the years through drugs, ego, and business disputes. Brown's acceptance of Tresvant's support during the performance suggested a man who had reached a point of vulnerability where pride mattered less than survival. His struggles with addiction and legal problems had continued well into his 50s, making him dependent on the goodwill of people he had previously betrayed and humiliated.
That's just how it's always been for us. That's just how he's always been. We know it.
Right.
We know each members and their thing that might get on your nerve or something about them. Everybody has that.
The acceptance that Tresvant had reached about Brown's behavior was both mature and tragic. After decades of hoping his childhood friend would change, he had finally realized that Bobby Brown was exactly who he had always been, and that expecting different behavior was futile and emotionally destructive. The pattern of reconciliation followed by new betrayals had repeated itself so many times that it had become predictable. Periods of apparent unity and brotherhood would be followed by new conflicts over money, control, or respect, leading to fresh rounds of public disputes and private resentments. The 2024 reconciliation was significant because it occurred without the pressure of a major tour or album promotion. Both men were older, presumably wiser, and faced with the reality that their time for making music together was limited by age and health issues. The acknowledgement that problematic behavior patterns were simply part of who the group members were represented a level of acceptance that had taken decades to achieve. Tresvant had finally stopped trying to change people and started focusing on managing his own responses to their dysfunction. The lasting impact of New Edition's internal conflicts extended beyond just the individual members to influence how R and B groups and the music industry handled similar situations. Their very public struggles had provided a cautionary tale about the importance of proper business management, psychological support, and conflict resolution for artistic collaborations. The dark truth that Tresvant had finally revealed at 57 was that New Edition had never really been the brotherhood their fans believed them to be. They were talented individuals who had been thrown together by circumstances, exploited by industry predators, and damaged by success they were too young and unprepared to handle responsibly. Yet despite all the betrayals, financial exploitation, violence, and public humiliation, something about their musical chemistry and shared history kept drawing them back together. The cycle would likely continue as long as any of them were alive to participate, driven by nostalgia, financial necessity, and the faint hope that this time might be different. Anyway, that's it for the video, folks. Bye.